And welcome everyone to our weekly call. And if you've just joined, you've just missed a fascinating discussion on time zones and how they intrinsically link to the DNS, amongst many other things. I'm sure there'll be a presentation from Peter on that topic imminently. But anyway, so as I say, welcome to the call. Let me share my slides. Which I've now done. Just move that across my screen so I can see them. Yeah, so as you can see, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the last week's Internet Governance Forum before sort of moving on to some of the sort of recent news developments, forthcoming events, etc. And since we were just talking about the temperature change, it was extremely hot and sunny in Kyoto, so it was a real shock to the system to land back in the UK to rain and go from on Friday, I think it was 25 degrees in Kyoto, and this morning it was 10 degrees at home, which is quite a big temperature difference. Certainly wakes you up in the morning when you've got 10 degrees. Anyway, let's talk a bit about the actual content, the substance of the IGF. So to talk around the main themes that came out from an event. The event itself, I should say, I don't know what the numbers were, but it seemed very well attentive. Large numbers of people, extremely diverse, both in terms of sort of gender, age, sort of countries people came from. So I was sat in one workshop which comprised mainly parliamentarians from Asia and Africa, who had quite a different point of view on topics, which was quite interesting to hear their take on things. So sort of very diverse in many dimensions, and probably, I suspect, all the better for it. So yeah, led to some very interesting discussions. Sort of topics that were commonplace across the sessions that I was in. A lot of the sessions had a link to AI, in some but not all cases, generative AI. Some of them it felt like it was a really tenuous connection. If I'm honest, it felt like the people that had pitched those proposals had perhaps had inside information that if they mentioned AI, they had a better chance of being accepted. So they sort of put AI in the title and maybe not much else, whereas others were much more genuinely exploring the ramifications of AI and were, I think, a lot better as a consequence. Internet fragmentation was absolutely a theme of a wide variety of the sessions. Probably no great surprise in that, but it's, again, some of those were more interesting than others. Quite a few of the sessions I was in various different ways touched on encryption and or child safety, CSAM, etc. Sort of variations on that theme, and there were a small number of sessions on standards or that were standards related. So quite diverse. I mean, the number of sessions on any given day was very high. So it's quite hard to keep tabs on things, and spread across quite a few different rooms on different floors. And just for a laugh, the IGF organisers labelled sessions sort of workshop 6, workshop 7, etc. But of course, the session titles didn't correlate to the room numbers, so you had to sort of try and map between workshop names, workshop numbers, and room numbers that they were physically in, which made it a little bit interesting for the first day or so until you worked out where things were. Um, in terms of the sort of topics, I came away, if I'm honest, a bit depressed about the sort of implications, the ramifications of AI, especially generative AI, and where that might be leading us, and whether um, by the time sort of regulation happens, it will be too late for some of the downsides of generative AI. So that was a bit depressing. Fragmentation, to oversimplify some of the discussions, it was, yeah, almost that was um, the big threat of how it might go horribly wrong in case if people don't pay attention and do the right thing. There might be a lot of fragmentation and we'll lose the internet as we know it. Although much of those discussions were a bit vague, it was more the sort of that threat of, whilst you must do the right thing because otherwise fragmentation. So yeah, as I say, some of those, I'm not sure it really stacked up to scrutiny, but there you are. Certainly, that's a popular point of view, sort of promoted by the Internet Society, and there are quite a few of the ISOC people in attendance. So maybe that's why that came across as a theme. Sort of child safety and encryption. The point of view varied significantly depending on what workshop that you were in, ranging from child safety is the biggest threat to encryption and therefore privacy as we know it. On the one hand, through to I can't think what the contrast for that would be, but there was certainly some workshops which were very sort of pro privacy and the privacy lobby, and other workshops which were much more sort of driven from the sort of perspective of child safety and anti-CSAM. And it was possible that because of there were lots of diary conflicts that people that attended the one set weren't able to make the other set and vice versa. So there wasn't too much meeting of minds in those. On standards, there were a couple of sessions on standards, one of which was the ITF had like a sort of open session to, and some of the IAB and ISG attended to sort of talk about the sort of role of the ITF and various other things. And I was told in that meeting that the ITF is very diverse and a multi-stakeholder body, which was a bit of a surprise to hear those two things. The ITF has many strengths, but I'm not sure diversity or multi-stakeholder would strike me as two of those major strengths. So that's some top level thoughts. Let me pause there because I don't know. I'm trying to ignore the chat, which has gone off at a tangent. So I don't, from anyone else that's on the call, I don't know if anyone else was in Kyoto or attended any of the sessions online and picked up any other sort of general themes from the meeting last week. So, Jen, you don't know if anyone was actually present, because the downside of it being such a big meeting, you don't necessarily know who's there. So, for example, I didn't know until afterwards that Paul Vixie had been in Kyoto for a couple of days, but we managed to miss each other completely. No one's put anything in the chat or unmuted, so I'm assuming you probably weren't present. Let me just see if there's anything worth calling out specifically. Yeah, maybe a few things I'll just call out. So and I'm referring to the slides that I put together last week, just highlighting some of the more interesting sessions as I saw them, in case you were able to attend remotely. There was a fair bit of discussion actually in a number of the sessions on sort of looking forward to some of the future sort of general governance discussions, so-called WSIS plus 20 is coming up next year, I think. So there are sort of a number of different sessions which sort of touched on that and how things might evolve, sort of reflecting how things have changed over the last 20 years since the IGF was formed. And it would need a new remit coming out of the next sort of tranche of governance discussions if it's to continue. There was some chat around that for those of you that have an interest in the internet sort of governance, very sort of generally. I'm just sort of scroll through these. Actually, there was a sort of side meeting discussion hosted by Google looking at how web crawlers could interact with web content, specifically if they have AI enabled web crawlers, and whether and how their ability to access content could be controlled by extending some of the current approaches to signposting to web crawlers, whether they're allowed to access whole websites or only parts of websites, or not, and whether that ought to apply to AI-enabled sort of crawlers of the future. So it's an interesting discussion. I won't say too much because it was under the Chatham House rule, but I can acknowledge that the discussion took place without saying too much about who participated in it. But it was just part of, I think, Google beginning a process of gathering thoughts from different groups on sort of how that they might put together some proposals, which I believe either already have or will find their way into the IETF as a proposed standard. Do you want to expand on that, Peter? Assuming that was aimed at that particular comment.
Yeah, sorry.
Another DNT.
It's a bit of a. I try not to make these like cynical remarks that a lot of people, it's easy to kind of be negative about these kind of meetings and these kind of talks, but it's so often that people have proposed ways to prevent bad things happening from crawling and from like passive tracking. That So my comment in chat was, is it going to be another DNT, which is a reference to the do not track header that browsers can send, which is basically useless and actually turned out to be just another data point for fingerprinting. So it's sort of worse than useless a lot of the time because it wasn't an enforced standard and nobody followed it. And so now nobody follows it at all.
So I'm desperately trying to remember the name. It's not that tag. There's a file, something.txt, and I can't for the life of me remember the
robot.txt.
Sorry,
the robots.txt.
It might be. I really can't.
What, the one that says don't crawl the site?
Yes, that one. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Alex has got it. Robots.txt.
Yeah. So it was. Yeah. It was how that might be extended in a modest way was really the premise for the.
Okay. Okay, I take it back. Robots.txt is much more followed, but it's still voluntary. So I guess if there are any AI bad actors, then But even with robots.txt, the stuff I've put in there that Google has indexed somehow, like the title of an HTML page will be in Google's index. The content might not be, but
well, you'll be pleased to know that my two contributions to the lunchtime discussion, which weren't popular with Team Google, were should it be opt-in rather than opt-out, and should it be a regulatory requirement rather than voluntary, and I had the impression that the facilitation team didn't welcome those two inputs. So
Well,
I maybe almost had my lunch taken away again after that. But
they shouldn't have invited you then if they don't want you to cause trouble. Um, yeah, I think you're right about the regulations. They're gonna be, it'll be too late by the time that they've actually come into existence, for some of the harm from AI and calling and privacy and that kind of things. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff as well.
Yeah, well, to be honest, to expand on that point about the sort of the harm, that's really aimed primarily at generative AI, which is actually producing new content. Because if you leave it much longer, there'll be so much new content produced by the generative AI that it will literally be too late to regulate in a meaningful way, because it'll be sort of after the fact in effect. The point of regulation will be to stop it from polluting the data pool, whereas if you leave it too late, then it's already happened. So it's like sort of genetically modified organisms. Effectively, if you release them into the wild and then
yeah, I think it's already happening, but
yes,
so I'll show that for Kathleen.
yeah, quite. Oh, sorry, Catherine, you got your hand up. I completely missed that. Apologies.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the midst of writing a blog, and it's already been handed off to my marketing, but they threw some questions back to me. And the reason is that with AI, when I'm grading papers, so I also teach at Georgetown, a master's level course. And what I noticed different this semester from even the summer semester is that people are using the misinformation generated by AI, not by themselves, but by vendors typically, who have content creators who are not vetting their content before publishing. And so the glaring one that had me scratching my head, and I actually had to do some searches to verify this, was AIOS. Sounds absurd, right?
Mhm.
But then I looked at their sources, and they gave these elaborate descriptions of what an AIOS was. And I found myself sitting there thinking, like, that's not an operating system. Like, why is it being described as such? And so yeah, that, and then I also found blockchain OS was described. So after, I saw their sources, I continued digging, and I found all sorts of content, and then like things that we've seen in other places, like LDAP is an authentication protocol. It's not. That I've seen before, but it's even more prominent. And so I'm writing a blog on that.
So it's not that your students haven't found sources, it's just that the content that they happen to have alighted upon is just wrong.
Right. So we were worried about students. And so, I start off the blog saying, as a professor, I was listening to what I should expect as the problems, right? People using AI themselves and not validating their content. I haven't run into that a single time yet. But what I'm running into is inaccurate content by other people that's not verified, and they're publishing it. And
Wow.
so, I'm providing some advice, like what I provided to my students in the blog, like, look at who the author is. And then I've asked my marketing department and to do a few things to show, the validity of our blogs, so that we could set potentially a pattern for industry. So that might be something some of you would like to pick up and share, or even, take what I suggest as possible ways forward, and suggest other things, right? Build off of it or iterate on what I suggest so we come to better answers. So that'll probably be out within a week or so.
Hmm. Oh, well, there you are then. Just how very topical that you're on that.
Well, I just couldn't believe it, right? I wasn't expecting it. And AIOS.
Yeah, the
But
other two,
yeah.
sorry, slightly depressing sort of aspects of this. One was chatting to Glenn Dean, who many of you know, and he was sort of painting a picture of AI sort of driven content production, so that potentially in the future you might say, I'd like to watch a program about Star Wars featuring your preferred favorite actor who's never actually appeared in Star Wars, to randomly pick on two things, and that would just happen, and that struck me as deeply depressing, because your chances of you therefore stumbling across challenging content are quite negligible if you become your own echo chamber potentially, rather than finding new and interesting unexpected things if that were to happen. And the other sort of depressing thing, to me at least, was a psychologist explaining it on sort of brain development, that you need sort of the contemplation and so on to develop your brain, and that becomes increasingly difficult if you've got it being sort of served up stuff all the time by AI, that you lose the sort of critical reasoning skills and so on. So dare I say it, that we may have reached peak human sort of brain capability, and it might be downhill from here, which is a depressing thought.
Can I just say, sorry, I don't want to talk about AI too much. It's supposed to be a DNS call, right? But I personally, I'm way more positive about this than a lot of people, because I remember these kind of arguments from when the internet started becoming popular, and you could like Google things to find the answers to stuff. And there was similar things that we saw that Kathleen was seeing with like Wikipedia, and Wikipedia not being a reliable source, and students quoting that because it had two notable sources which were not, which were fake or whatever. So I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic. I guess it remains to be seen, but I think that we will learn the skills to be able to, hopefully the new skills that we will learn will be being able to identify or confirm things better than we have done. That's my, I don't
There are
know,
probably
maybe naive
arguments that
take.
can be made that the general internet and the Googleization of the internet probably made us dumber as a whole, and we have those arguments all the time. But I would also suspect that that generative AI content aspect will also probably become a differentiator. There will probably be certain people that will take advantage of it, and it will drag them down, but it will also be an amplifier for other people, so that productivity gap, that quality gap will probably increase between the top and the bottom producers.
Yeah, I agree that there's value. I was just noting that I saw a problem that I wasn't expecting, that I hadn't heard anyone talk about yet.
It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I guess if it's easy to produce stuff at volume, then some people will do that. Never mind the quality.
Yeah, it's kind of a scaling issue, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that was me going off a bit of a tangent, but I thought it was interesting. I'll rattle through some of these. I have to say, I don't think anyone's on from Nominet this week, but Nominet hosted a really nice function on the Monday night. They managed to hire a restaurant at about 3 weeks' notice in Kyoto, which was quite impressive, and served numerous sort of very delightfully presented courses of excellent Japanese food to about a party of about 40 people, including John Whittingdale, who's a Minister of State from the UK government, who was in Kyoto for literally 2 days, and was heading back the next morning. So that was, yeah, a very pleasant evening, courtesy of Nominet. So I felt I ought to mention that. Moving swiftly on, probably the one thing I mentioned on this slide, there was an ICANN hosted session on DNS privacy, which it was very interesting. Although there was a point, admittedly I was maybe a little bit tired, there was a point in the afternoon in that presentation where it felt like they were speaking English, but not all the individual words were English, but the actual collective meaning of some of the words was not entirely clear. On some of the deeper facets of ICANN related stuff. But it was rounded off with Jeff Houston giving a really useful presentation, just talking around some of the more recent sort of developments in terms of encrypted DNS, DNSSEC, etc. Just to sort of show how problems were being solved, although I did have to remind him rather amusingly to consider the take up of some of those, and maybe it wasn't as fast as we might hope in terms of things like DNSSEC. To say amusingly, given that Jeff is normally the first to quote those sorts of figures. But he was just giving a very high level overview. But yeah, if you wanted to just sort of dip into something, that might be a useful session to dip in on, particularly if you want to find out about some of the latest sort of thinking from ICANN on a couple of topics, related to policy and so on. Then on the Wednesday, there was rather more around regulations, sort of child protection, etc. And that's where I said at the start, we're getting sort of two sides of the same argument. But there wasn't a lot of meeting of minds in the sessions that I joined. Certainly, that may not have been the case with others, but they were quite sort of separated discussions covering some of the various aspects. And then just rounding it off on Thursday, a couple of sessions on standards. One sort of loosely related to human rights, and then there was the IETF Open Forum as well, which included Lars in his capacity of chair of the IESG, Mira as chair of the IAB, and a couple of members of each of those two groups as well, just to sort of explain, again, pretty high level terms, how the IETF is structured and operates, some of the topics currently being worked on, just to really just give a very high level view to some of the participants in the IGF that maybe were new to this area, to potentially attract them to come along to Prague or Brisbane, depending on where they're located, to engage directly. There was also an announcement, which I think I mentioned last week. The European Commission confirmed they're going to fund some capacity building amongst some civil society organisations to engage with standards bodies, including the IETF, which I personally think is a sort of really good development. So that might see a little bit more diversity coming into the IETF community. And I think the intent is to fund it for maybe a couple of years or so, to give a chance for capacity development and to build familiarity with the various standards bodies. I think I'll pause there because I've been sort of talking at people enough, and just see if there's anything else coming up. Just looking at the chat, I see a reference to if we're being polite, AI hallucinations, stuff made up based on stats would be another way of putting it, from Kurt. So clearly, Kathleen, that's of interest to some of the people on this call then, as and when your blog is issued. So maybe send me the link and I'll share it with people so they can peruse the published version when you have it. Okay, let me, unless anyone's got any other comments on the IGF, and I checked this morning, I don't see any of the recordings of any of the sessions being up yet, but there's definitely a few I think be well worth watching when they are up, but I'll keep an eye out for those and let you know when they've landed, so they are accessible to replay for anyone that wasn't present. Okay, so that takes us on to some of the news headlines. So a bit more in the news this week on ECH, or from the last week or so. There was an article just explaining how it makes pirate sites more accessible, because a lot of them are hosted on Cloudflare apparently. So the fact that Cloudflare has implemented ECH will mean that people that want to access them will easily bypass some of the content filtering systems that are out there. Just throw that in, and then perhaps more usefully, just confirmation of support for ECH in Chrome and Firefox, and probably some other browsers, but those ones happen to catch my eye in the news headlines this week. There was also a useful article from Echo, just they pull together some of the key output from their recent DNS best practice webinars. So that's all accessible in one place through that link. Jeff Houston, I mentioned earlier, from APNIC, has published some observations from the recent OARC meeting, just to give his take on that. Other things, an interesting article on courtesy of Infoblox on a new DNS threat actor that they've identified, OpenTangle. You may have seen a couple of other things. Ripe did a live blog of IGF, so that's definitely worth a look. And also Milton Miller has also published his take on some of the various discussions at the IGF. He was actually there in person because I happened to see him. So you got a couple of roundups from those two groups. And then just a reminder of Echo's program that goes with ICANN 78 next week. On sort of a number of things that they're doing relevant to the DNS. And finally, ICS have got, sorry, ISC, even not ICS, ISC got a webinar coming up. So I just, which I noticed on social media, so I'll put that in there as well, in case that's of interest to anyone, coming up in about a week and a half, I think. And then other things that caught my eye, I won't go through all of these, probably just one I'll mention. Over the weekend, just topically, I saw that the European Commission has begun sending requests for information to various social media platforms. They started with X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, asking for information on their compliance with the requirements of the Digital Service Act. This is with regards to misinformation relating to the current very sad events in Israel and Palestine. They've subsequently, from sending it out to X, they've sent out the sort of pretty much identical information requests to Meta, to TikTok, and others as well. So they do, I think, all of the platforms. There's various other stuff there as well, but that's probably the most topical one, I think, currently. in terms of deadlines, if you wanted to enter the Ripe Labs article competition, get sort of potentially free tickets and travel to the next Ripe meeting, you've missed the deadline by 1 day. That has literally just gone, and we got the deadline fast approaching now for cut-off for submission of internet drafts for ITF 118. So just a reminder, that's coming up if you plan to submit a new draft or update an existing one. Yeah, you should know if you plan to attend NANOG, you're presumably already in San Diego, as it's already underway. And then before we know it, it'd be ICANN, then ITF 118, and then RIPE, all pretty much in quick succession over the next few weeks. And when I checked the ITF 118 registration at the weekend, I think it was around 750 to 800 mark from memory. So it looks like the sort of numbers are sort of ticking up for in-person participation quite nicely at the moment. Finally, in terms of what we're playing next week, I hope to be joined by two of the team from the DNS Research Federation to talk about blockchain naming systems, in particular Ethereum, but not just Ethereum. I say hope to be joined. We discussed and agreed this during IGF last week, but I'm conscious they're also attending an ICANN meeting and RIPE as well. So I just want to make sure we'll firm that up with them in the next day or so, that they can definitely do it and they won't be on a plane whilst the call's happening. And then following week, we'll be talking about sort of the use of SNI versus DNS and the relative reliability of each of those two as potential indicators of compromise, as that's topic has sort of come up on this call in recent weeks. And I hope to add at some point soon something about content getting down to the sort of to the root servers, but I think Kurt, you wanted to have a bit of time to just pull some thoughts together on that, which we'll then share on this call first, just to trigger people's thinking before picking that up on a future call as a proper discussion. I think that was pretty much it from me. So let me stop talking and stop sharing there and see, is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up on the call, which may or may not be AI related. Actually, one thing I might ask Peter, as you've sort of recently changed roles, did you want to mention your new role in case anyone hasn't picked up on it?
Not just at the moment. I'm just still figuring a couple of things out. Sorry,
oh, okay.
Thanks.
Right. Apologies.
Thanks, Andrew. No, it's all right. But yeah, I did want to ask you about that DDoS attack that happened, the biggest one ever.
Oh yes,
that was was that the one that Google experienced?
Google and Cloudflare and one of the, I think Google got the biggest hit traffic wise, actually. I think Cloudflare was second, and I can't remember who was probably AWS was
it the same? Was it like the same threat actor, the same people doing it? Has anyone sort of claimed responsibility for it?
I'm not sure.
Sorry,
anyone on the call know? Anyone looked into that?
I read a write-up of it on the Google blog, but I didn't realize it was other people as well. I guess I'm not keeping up with the news. Yeah, it was quite interesting. It was an amplification attack with HTTP2.
Yeah, did anyone else more closer to the detail on that one out of interest? And if you are, feel free to unmute and no one's admitting to knowledge. Well, maybe we'll come back to that next week then, Peter. I'll make a note to there might be a bit more information by next week, in fairness, as it was quite recent. Yeah. Okay, well, that'd be a bit of homework to look into. So anything from anyone else? Anything from the last week, or anything that you want to highlight that's coming up, maybe from your employee, you think would be useful for others to be aware of, and there's a chance to advertise it if appropriate. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing any hands raised just yet. So looking like not. In which case, as I say, I'll confirm with the DNS Research Federation team in the next couple of days that they are available to just share their thoughts on sort of blockchain DNS. Subject to that confirmation, that will most likely be the topic that we'll focus on the call this time next week. Which I think will be really interesting. Something that sort of been on the agenda to cover for the last little while, but we were only able to have the conversation last week, so I'm quite looking forward to that. See, Kurt's not a fan of blockchain. Sorry, Kurt. I personally am quite skeptical, by the way, about the validity of blockchain DNS, but let's have the conversation to understand why it's a really bad idea. At least that's my bias. Anyway, on that positive note, have a great week, everyone, and look forward to catching up same time next week. So speak to you all then.